The morning sun painted golden streaks across the bustling coffee shop windows as customers lined up for their daily dose of caffeine. Among them stood Michelle Thompson, a successful 32-year-old business consultant, checking her phone while waiting patiently in line. The small coffee shop in downtown Chicago had been her morning ritual for the past 3 years, its familiar warmth and aromatic coffee beans providing comfort before her demanding workday. Today seemed like any other Tuesday until it wasn't. As Michelle reached the counter to place her usual order, a medium caramel latte with an extra shot, an older woman in an expensive beige coat pushed past her, bumping her shoulder roughly. "Excuse me," Michelle said politely, steadying herself. "There's actually a line." The woman turned, her face contorted with unexpected anger. "I don't have time to wait behind you people," she spat, emphasizing the last 2 words with unmistakable disdain. The coffee shop fell silent, the morning chatter dying instantly as heads turned toward the confrontation. Michelle felt her heart rate quicken, but years of handling difficult corporate negotiations had taught her to maintain her composure. She straightened her blazer, took a deep breath, and was about to respond when the woman continued her tirade. "You know what? Why don't you just go back to Africa?" the woman sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The coffee shop grew even quieter, if that was possible. A barista stopped mid-pour, coffee beans spilled forgotten on the counter. Michelle noticed a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, watching wide-eyed from behind her mother's legs at a nearby table. That sight made something shift inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about that little girl and countless others who needed to see how to handle hate with dignity. Taking another measured breath, Michelle smiled, not a forced smile, but one that reached her eyes with genuine compassion. "Ma'am," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I was born in Detroit, and my grandmother was born in Chicago. But you know what? I've actually been to Africa, Ghana specifically, last year for a business conference. It's a beautiful continent with 54 diverse countries, rich cultures, and some of the kindest people I've ever met." She paused, maintaining eye contact with the now flustered woman. "If you're interested, I'd be happy to tell you about my experiences there over coffee." "My treat." The gentle strength in her voice carried through the silent cafe, each word deliberate and dignified. The woman's face cycled through various emotions, anger, confusion, and finally, what appeared to be shame. She opened her mouth to respond but found no words. Behind her, someone started clapping, and soon the entire coffee shop joined in. The woman hurriedly left the shop, the bell above the door chiming her exit. As Michelle finally ordered her coffee, the barista insisted it was on the house. But what touched her most was when the mother of the young girl approached her, tears in her eyes, and thanked her for showing her daughter how to stand up to hatred with grace and education rather than anger. The incident could have been just another viral moment of racism caught on camera, ending in screams and security being called. Instead, it became a powerful lesson in turning hatred into an opportunity for education and growth. Michelle's response didn't just leave one person speechless, it left an entire coffee shop full of witnesses with a new perspective on how to combat racism with dignity, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to humanity. As news of the incident spread through social media and local news, it sparked important conversations about handling racism in public spaces. Michelle's approach demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't matching its intensity, but transcending it with wisdom and an invitation to learn. As Michelle left the coffee shop that morning, she had no idea her composed response would spark a movement. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications. A customer in the cafe had recorded the entire interaction, and the video was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. By lunchtime, her colleague knocked on her office door. "Have you seen it?" she asked, holding up her phone. "You're trending." The video had already garnered hundreds of thousands of views, with comments pouring in from around the world. But what caught Michelle's attention weren't just the numbers, it was the stories people were sharing in response. A high school teacher in Minnesota wrote about using the video in her classroom to discuss conflict resolution. A father in Texas shared how he watched it with his teenage daughters, teaching them about maintaining dignity in the face of discrimination. Even more surprisingly, people began sharing their own stories of turning negative encounters into opportunities for education and understanding. That evening, as Michelle sat in her apartment reading through messages, one particular email stood out. It was from the woman in the beige coat. "I couldn't sleep last night," the message began. "Your response to my inexcusable behavior showed me something I've been missing my entire life, the power of responding to ignorance with wisdom." The woman, who introduced herself as Patricia, went on to explain how she'd grown up in a small town with deeply rooted prejudices. She'd never questioned these beliefs until that moment in the coffee shop when Michelle's response forced her to confront her own ignorance. "Your offer to share your experiences over coffee still stands?" she asked at the end of the email. Michelle sat with this message for a long time, considering its implications. This wasn't just about one interaction anymore, it was about the possibility of real change, one conversation at a time. She thought about her parents, who had always taught her that education was the most powerful response to ignorance. They had raised her to believe that change doesn't come from matching hatred with hatred, but from breaking the cycle with understanding. Later that week, local news stations picked up the story. But instead of focusing on the initial conflict, they highlighted the educational impact the video was having in schools and communities. Michelle received invitations to speak at community centers and schools about her experience and approach to handling discrimination. The coffee shop where it all happened noticed a change too. The owner, inspired by the incident, started a weekly community conversations event where people from different backgrounds could share their stories over free coffee. The first event was packed, with people spilling out onto the sidewalk, all eager to be part of this unexpected movement toward understanding. One morning, about a week after the incident, Michelle returned to the coffee shop at her usual time. As she waited in line, she noticed something different. People weren't just standing in silence, staring at their phones. There were conversations happening between strangers, smiles being exchanged, and a warmth that went beyond the steam rising from coffee cups. The barista who had witnessed everything greeted her with a bright smile. "You've changed this place," he said, preparing her usual order. "People come in now not just for coffee, but hoping to be part of something bigger." He pointed to a small sign near the register that read, "Kindness is brewing here, join our community conversations every Thursday." Michelle looked around the coffee shop, taking in the scene. The same table where that little girl had watched everything unfold was now occupied by a diverse group of students working on what appeared to be a school project. Near the window, an elderly man was engaged in animated conversation with a young woman wearing a hijab, both laughing over their coffee. What had started as an ugly incident had transformed into something beautiful, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single moment of choosing grace over anger, education over ignorance, and hope over hate. The ripple effects of that morning continued to spread, touching lives in ways Michelle never could have imagined when she first walked into the coffee shop that Tuesday morning. 2 weeks after the incident, Michelle sat across from Patricia at the same coffee shop where their paths had first crossed. The tension was palpable at first, both women carefully stirring their drinks, searching for the right words to begin. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow that seemed to soften the awkwardness of the moment. "I brought something to show you," Patricia said, breaking the silence. She pulled out her phone and opened her gallery. "This is my granddaughter's school project." The screen showed a colorful poster titled, "Heroes in Our Community," with a printed screenshot from the viral video prominently displayed in the center. "She's 8, Patricia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "When she saw the video, she asked me why the mean lady was so angry. I realized I had no good answer for her. That's when it really hit me, what kind of world am I helping create for her? Michelle listened intently as Patricia shared her journey of the past 2 weeks. She had enrolled in a diversity awareness program at her local community center and had started volunteering at a multicultural senior home. "I've lived in my bubble for 62 years, she admitted. Your response that day didn't just leave me speechless, it made me question everything I thought I knew." Their conversation was interrupted by a group of teenagers who approached their table, looking nervous but determined. "Sorry to interrupt," one of them said, "but we recognized you both from the video. We're doing a school documentary about breaking stereotypes and challenging racism. Would you be willing to share your story?" What happened next surprised everyone. Patricia turned to Michelle and asked, "Would it be okay if I shared what it's like to confront and work on changing your own prejudices? People need to hear that it's possible to change, no matter your age." The teenagers' documentary project unexpectedly became a catalyst for broader change. They interviewed other community members, exploring how the coffee shop incident had affected the neighborhood. The local art center offered its space for a screening, but as word spread, they had to move to a larger venue to accommodate the interest. Meanwhile, Michelle's professional life took an unexpected turn. Her consulting firm, impressed by how she handled the situation, asked her to develop a corporate training program on conflict resolution and inclusive communication. "We're not just teaching people how to avoid conflicts," Michelle explained to her boss. "We're showing them how to transform difficult moments into opportunities for growth." The coffee shop owner, inspired by the ongoing impact, decided to renovate one corner of the cafe into a small library focused on diverse voices and experiences. Customers could now borrow books while enjoying their coffee, creating an informal learning space that fostered understanding and dialogue. One morning, as Michelle helped arrange books in the new library corner, she overheard a conversation between two elderly men, one white, one black, discussing their experiences growing up in different parts of Chicago. "In my 70 years, one said to the other, I've never had a conversation like this. Why did we wait so long?" The impact rippled beyond their city. Other coffee shops across the country began adopting similar community initiatives. A college professor in California developed a case study about the incident for her conflict resolution course. A playwright in New York started working on a theater piece inspired by the story, focusing on moments of transformation in everyday lives. Patricia, continuing her journey of growth, organized a monthly dinner group where people from different backgrounds could share meals and stories. "Food and conversation," she often said, "those are the real bridges between people." The first dinner was held in her home, with Michelle as the guest of honor. The local newspaper ran a feature story titled, "When Hate Met Hope: How a Coffee Shop Confrontation Transformed a Community." The article highlighted not just Michelle and Patricia's story, but the numerous initiatives and changes that had grown from that single moment. One day, Michelle received a letter from a woman in Texas. "I was that angry person once," the letter read. "After seeing your video, I realized it's never too late to change. Thank you for showing us how." Attached was a photo of the woman at a multicultural community event she had helped organize. As the third week drew to a close, Michelle reflected on how a moment that could have added more darkness to the world had instead sparked countless points of light. The coffee shop had become more than just a place for morning caffeine, it was a symbol of possibility, a reminder that change begins with individual choices and ripples outward in ways we can never predict. The story continued to unfold, not as a simple tale of conflict and resolution, but as a complex narrative of human growth, community transformation, and the power of choosing wisdom over reaction. Each day brought new examples of how one moment of grace could inspire countless others to choose a better way forward. 1 month after the incident, Michelle found herself standing before an auditorium filled with eager faces at a local high school. The school's diversity club had invited her to speak at their annual assembly, but what she discovered that morning went far beyond her expectations. The students had prepared a presentation of their own. They had collected stories from their families, neighbors, and community members about moments when they'd faced discrimination and how they'd handled it. As Michelle watched from the side of the stage, students of different backgrounds took turns sharing these powerful narratives. A sophomore student stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Before seeing Michelle's video, I always thought fighting back meant getting angry. Now I understand that the strongest response can be staying calm and offering understanding. Last week, when someone made fun of my accent, instead of feeling ashamed, I offered to teach them some words in my native language. Today, that person is learning Korean with me during lunch breaks." The assembly took an unexpected turn when several teachers shared their own experiences. An English teacher revealed how the video had changed her approach to handling classroom conflicts. "Now, when I hear students make insensitive comments, I don't just scold them. I create opportunities for dialogue and understanding." During the Q&A session, a quiet student raised his hand. "My grandfather says things like that woman in the coffee shop," he admitted, his voice trembling. "I never knew how to respond. But after seeing how you handled it, I tried talking to him about my best friend, who's from Nigeria. For the first time, he actually listened. He even came to our soccer game last weekend." After the assembly, the school principal shared something remarkable with Michelle. Reported incidents of bullying had decreased by 40% since they started using her video as a teaching tool. The school's peer mediation program had seen a surge in volunteers, with students eager to learn how to handle conflicts more constructively. Meanwhile, back at the coffee shop, something extraordinary was happening. The owner had started a "Pay It Forward with Knowledge" board. Customers could leave not just prepaid coffee for strangers, but also book recommendations, interesting facts about their cultures, or invitations to cultural events. The wall had become a colorful mosaic of sticky notes, each one a small bridge between communities. Patricia, continuing her journey of transformation, had started mentoring other older adults who wanted to confront their own prejudices. "Age is no excuse for ignorance," she would say during their meetings. "Every day is a chance to learn and grow." Her granddaughter's school project had evolved into a traveling exhibition, visiting different schools in the district. One afternoon, Michelle received an unexpected call from a national education conference. They wanted her to keynote their annual event, focusing on how small moments can be used to teach bigger lessons about humanity and dignity. As she prepared her speech, Michelle reflected on how a single morning had sparked such far-reaching changes. The local business community took notice too. Several companies reached out to Michelle's consulting firm, seeking guidance on creating more inclusive workplaces. "We don't want to just avoid incidents," one CEO explained. "We want to build environments where everyone feels they belong." The coffee shop's community conversations had grown so popular that they had to start hosting them in the community center next door. Each session now had a theme, from understanding our neighbors' journeys to building bridges through food and stories. People would bring dishes from their cultures, sharing not just meals but the stories behind them. A group of film students from the local university asked to document these gatherings. Their short film, titled Brewing Change, captured the authentic moments of connection that happened when people chose to open their hearts and minds to different perspectives. One particularly moving moment came when an elderly man who had initially been skeptical of the whole initiative stood up to speak. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I knew everything about my community. But sitting here these past few weeks, sharing coffee with neighbors I never really knew before, I realize I was living in a bubble of my own making. Every person in this room has taught me something valuable." The impact continued to spread in unexpected ways. A tech startup developed an app inspired by the incident, helping people find and join community dialogue groups in their areas. Local businesses began incorporating lessons from Michelle's story into their customer service training. Michelle's response had shown that the most powerful way to combat prejudice wasn't through confrontation, but through connection. Her story had become a template for turning hostile moments into opportunities for growth and understanding. As the fourth week drew to a close, Michelle sat in her usual spot by the coffee shop window, watching the diverse mix of people coming and going. A young barista approached her table with a fresh cup of coffee. "You know," she said, smiling, "we've had to order twice as many cups since all this started. Turns out people stay longer when they're actually talking to each other." The coffee shop had become more than just a business, it was a living laboratory of human connection, proving that change doesn't always require grand gestures or elaborate programs. Sometimes, it starts with a simple choice to respond to hatred with grace, and the courage to believe that every person has the capacity to learn and grow. 6 weeks after the incident, Michelle received an invitation that would take her story in an unexpected direction. A small community center in her grandmother's old neighborhood was hosting a reunion for longtime residents, and they wanted her to speak. The organizer mentioned that someone special wanted to meet her. As Michelle walked into the community center that Saturday morning, the smell of soul food and sounds of laughter filled the air. Elderly residents sat at round tables, sharing memories of the neighborhood's history. Among them was an elegant woman in her 80s, who immediately caught Michelle's attention. "I'm Rose," the woman said, reaching for Michelle's hand. "I was there that day in 1963 when your grandmother organized the neighborhood's first integrated block party." Michelle's eyes widened. She had heard this story countless times growing up, but meeting someone who had actually been there was different. Rose shared how Michelle's grandmother had faced similar prejudice but chose to respond by organizing community events that brought people together. "When I saw your video," Rose said, her eyes tearing up, "I saw your grandmother in you. She had that same way of turning anger into opportunity." During lunch, more stories emerged. An elderly man recalled how Michelle's grandmother had started a reading program in her garage, teaching both black and white children when schools were still struggling with integration. "She always said education was the key to understanding," he remembered. The connection to her grandmother's legacy gave Michelle's viral moment a deeper meaning. She wasn't just creating change, she was continuing a family tradition of transforming conflict into connection. The community center decided to revive some of her grandmother's old programs, updated for current times. Meanwhile, the coffee shop's influence continued to grow. A regular customer, inspired by the ongoing changes, started a podcast called Conversations Over Coffee, featuring stories of people who had found common ground despite their differences. The first episode, featuring Michelle and Patricia, quickly became viral. Patricia's transformation had deepened. She discovered that her own grandmother had been an immigrant who faced discrimination, a history her family rarely discussed. This revelation led her to start a genealogy group where people could explore their family histories together, often finding surprising connections and shared experiences. One day, a tour bus stopped outside the coffee shop. The guide explained that it had become part of their Chicago Stories of Hope tour, alongside other historical sites of social change in the city. Michelle watched from her usual spot as tourists took photos, feeling both amused and moved by how her simple response had become part of the city's narrative. The coffee shop owner had embraced the change fully. He collaborated with a local artist to create a mural on the shop's wall, depicting diverse hands holding coffee cups, with the words, "Every cup holds a story," written in multiple languages. The mural became a popular spot for photos and reflection. The teenager who had filmed the original video reached out to Michelle with an update. Her post had inspired a global dignity challenge on social media, where people shared stories of responding to prejudice with grace and wisdom. The challenge had reached countries across the world, with participants translating their stories into multiple languages. A touching moment came when a group of elementary school students visited the coffee shop on a field trip. Their assignment was to write about everyday heroes in their community. As they sat sipping hot chocolate, they interviewed regular customers about how the incident had changed their perspectives. One little girl asked Michelle, "Were you scared that day?" Michelle thought carefully before answering, "Yes, but I remembered something my grandmother taught me: being scared is okay, but letting fear stop you from doing what's right isn't." Sometimes the scariest moments are the ones where we can make the biggest difference. The coffee shop's community conversations had evolved into themed weeks. Heritage Week featured different cultural. Michelle's grandmother had started a reading program in her garage, teaching both black and white children when schools were still struggling with integration. She always said education was the key to understanding, he remembered. The connection to her grandmother's legacy gave Michelle's viral moment a deeper meaning. She wasn't just creating change, she was continuing a family tradition of transforming conflict into connection. The community center decided to revive some of her grandmother's old programs, updated for current times. Meanwhile, the coffee shop's influence continued to grow. A regular customer, inspired by the ongoing changes, started a podcast called Conversations Over Coffee, featuring stories of people who had found common ground despite their differences. The first episode, featuring Michelle and Patricia, quickly became viral. Patricia's transformation had deepened. She discovered that her own grandmother had been an immigrant who faced discrimination, a history her family rarely discussed. This revelation led her to start a genealogy group where people could explore their family histories together, often finding surprising connections and shared experiences. One day, a tour bus stopped outside the coffee shop. The guide explained that it had become part of their Chicago Stories of Hope tour, alongside other historical sites of social change in the city. Michelle watched from her usual spot as tourists took photos, feeling both amused and moved by how her simple response had become part of the city's narrative. The coffee shop owner had embraced the change fully. He collaborated with a local artist to create a mural on the shop's wall, depicting diverse hands holding coffee cups, with the words, "Every cup holds a story," written in multiple languages. The mural became a popular spot for photos and reflection. The teenager who had filmed the original video reached out to Michelle with an update. Her post had inspired a global dignity challenge on social media, where people shared stories of responding to prejudice with grace and wisdom. The challenge had reached countries across the world, with participants translating their stories into multiple languages. A touching moment came when a group of elementary school students visited the coffee shop on a field trip. Their assignment was to write about everyday heroes in their community. As they sat sipping hot chocolate, they interviewed regular customers about how the incident had changed their perspectives. One little girl asked Michelle, "Were you scared that day?" Michelle thought carefully before answering, "Yes, but I remembered something my grandmother taught me: being scared is okay, but letting fear stop you from doing what's right isn't." Sometimes the scariest moments are the ones where we can make the biggest difference. The coffee shop's community conversations had evolved into themed weeks. Heritage Week featured different cultural celebrations each day. Bridge Building Week focused on connecting different generations and communities. The events became so popular that other businesses in the area started staying open later to accommodate the overflow crowds. Local faith leaders took notice too. They organized an interfaith dialogue series, using the coffee shop's model of combining casual conversation with deeper discussion. The series brought together people from different religious backgrounds who might never have interacted otherwise. One rainy evening, as Michelle was leaving work, she encountered an elderly couple struggling with their umbrella near the coffee shop. As she helped them, the woman mentioned they had traveled from Minnesota just to visit the famous coffee shop. "We've been married for 50 years, she explained, "but we grew up in segregated communities. Your story made us realize it's never too late to be part of positive change." The incident had also influenced how local businesses handled customer service training. Instead of just focusing on handling complaints, they now included scenarios about turning difficult situations into opportunities for connection. Several managers reported improved customer interactions and stronger community relationships. A local theater group developed an interactive play based on the coffee shop incident, where audience members could pause the action and suggest different responses to conflict situations. The performances became popular with schools and community groups as a tool for teaching conflict resolution. As the 5th week drew to a close, Michelle sat in the coffee shop, working on her laptop. A new barista who didn't recognize her asked if she'd heard about what happened there a few weeks ago. Michelle smiled and said she had. The barista excitedly shared how the story had inspired her to apply for the job, wanting to be part of a place that represented positive change. "You know what's really cool," the barista said, "every day, someone comes in and says this place gave them hope. It's not just about coffee anymore, it's about proving that one person's choice to respond with kindness can change everything." 2 months after the incident, Michelle found herself in an unexpected situation. A publishing house had reached out, asking her to write a book about her experience and its aftermath. At first, she hesitated, unsure if her story warranted a book. But then the letters started arriving. Every day, the coffee shop received mail from around the country, addressed to "the woman who chose grace." People shared their own stories of transformation, inspired by her response. A retired teacher wrote about how he'd harbored prejudices his entire career without realizing it. After watching the video, he'd started volunteering at an inner-city school, challenging his own preconceptions daily. One morning, as Michelle sorted through the letters with the coffee shop owner, they found one that stood out. It was from a small town in Iowa, where a local diner had faced racial tensions after an influx of immigrant workers. The town had used Michelle's story as a template for community healing, starting their own version of community conversations over breakfast. The coffee shop's impact continued to evolve in surprising ways. A group of psychology researchers from a local university began studying what they called the coffee shop effect, how creating informal spaces for dialogue could transform community relationships. Their preliminary findings showed that businesses that adopted similar community-building approaches saw decreased incidents of conflict and increased customer loyalty. Patricia's journey had taken an interesting turn. She'd started working with a documentary filmmaker to capture stories of people confronting and overcoming their own prejudices. "We need to show that change is possible," she explained during a filming break. "My generation especially needs to see that it's never too late to learn and grow." The documentary project uncovered unexpected connections. They found a former white supremacist who now worked in diversity education, a woman who had overcome religious prejudices to help build an interfaith community center, and countless others who had made the difficult journey from bias to understanding. One particularly moving story came from a teenager who had been on the verge of joining a hate group when he saw Michelle's video. "What struck me," he wrote, "wasn't just how she handled the situation, but how she saw the humanity in someone who wasn't showing any humanity to her. It made me question everything I was starting to believe." The coffee shop had become a case study in how businesses could serve as catalysts for social change. Business schools began including it in their curriculum, examining how a single incident, handled with wisdom, could transform a company's role in its community. Local government took notice too. The city council invited Michelle and the coffee shop owner to help develop a community relations program for public service workers. "We need to train our staff to see every interaction as an opportunity for building understanding," the council chairman explained. The training program started with bus drivers and library staff, then expanded to include all public-facing city employees. Within months, there was a measurable decrease in reported incidents of discrimination in public services. More importantly, there was an increase in positive interactions between city workers and residents from different backgrounds. Michelle's consulting work had evolved as well. Companies weren't just asking her to handle crisis management anymore. They wanted to create environments where crises were less likely to occur. She developed a training program called Beyond Tolerance, focusing on moving from mere acceptance to genuine appreciation of differences. One company implemented her program throughout their retail chain. 6 months later, their employee satisfaction scores had increased significantly, and customer complaints had dropped by 30%. It's not just about avoiding negative interactions, the HR director noted. It's about creating a culture where positive interactions become the norm. The coffee shop's influence spread to unexpected places. A prison rehabilitation program incorporated elements of the community conversations model into their pre-release preparation. Inmates learned to handle conflict through dialogue and understanding, skills that proved valuable upon their return to society. During one of these prison sessions, an older inmate shared something profound. "I've spent 20 years here because I let hatred control my actions," he said. Watching that video, seeing how different things could be if we just took a moment to think and respond with wisdom, it's changed how I plan to live when I get out. The original viral video had sparked countless others. People began sharing their own coffee shop moments, instances where they chose understanding over confrontation, dialogue over division. These stories created a virtual tapestry of hope, showing how individual choices could create collective change. A tech company developed an app inspired by the movement, helping people find businesses in their area that hosted community dialogue events. The app quickly gained users across the country, with people seeking out these spaces of connection and conversation. As the 6th week drew to a close, Michelle visited a new coffee shop that had opened in a neighboring city, modeled after the original's community-focused approach. The owner had never met Michelle but had been inspired by her story. "We wanted to create more than just a business," she explained. "We wanted to create a space where change is possible." Sitting there, watching people from different walks of life engage in genuine conversation, Michelle reflected on how a single moment of grace had multiplied into countless opportunities for transformation. The story wasn't just about her response to prejudice anymore. It had become about how communities could choose to grow together rather than fall apart. A young girl approached Michelle's table, clutching a school newspaper. She was writing an article about places in the city where people could find hope. "Someone told me this was one of those places," she said. "Is it true that one person's actions can really change things?" Michelle smiled, thinking of all the letters, all the stories, all the lives touched by a simple choice made in a coffee shop. "Yes," she replied, "but only if we're brave enough to choose wisdom over anger, and understanding over fear. The real change happens when we inspire others to make that same choice." 3 months after the incident, Michelle stood in front of her bathroom mirror, preparing for what would be one of the most significant moments of her journey. The World Tolerance Summit had invited her to be their keynote speaker, but that wasn't what made her nervous. Today, she would be sharing the stage with 5 other individuals who had similar stories, people who had turned moments of hate into opportunities for change. The summit was being held at a convention center just blocks away from the coffee shop where it all began. As Michelle walked past the shop that morning, she saw something that made her pause. A line of people stretched around the block, but it wasn't the usual morning coffee rush. They were waiting to attend the first Coffee Shop Conversations Global Conference. Inside the convention center, Michelle met her fellow speakers. There was a Muslim woman from Michigan who had responded to anti-Islamic graffiti by organizing interfaith art projects in her community. A Hispanic store owner from Texas had turned a racist encounter into a monthly cultural exchange program. Each story was different, but they shared a common thread: the choice to respond to hatred with wisdom and grace. During the pre-event preparation, a young volunteer approached Michelle with tears in her eyes. "My brother was bullied out of school last year because of his disability," she shared. "After seeing your video, I started a peer support program. He's back in school now, and the same kids who once bullied him are his buddies in the program." The summit opened with a surprise virtual appearance from a renowned civil rights leader who had watched the coffee shop video from his hospital bed. "In my 50 years of activism," he said, "I've learned that the most powerful weapon against hatred is not more hatred, but unwavering dignity and the courage to see humanity even in those who deny yours." As Michelle took the stage, she noticed Patricia sitting in the front row, surrounded by members of her new mentoring group, older adults committed to unlearning prejudices and becoming bridges in their communities. The sight gave her speech an unexpected emotional weight. Change doesn't always come with grand gestures or dramatic moments, Michelle began. Sometimes, it comes with a simple choice in a coffee shop on an ordinary Tuesday morning. But what I've learned over these past months is that these small choices can create ripples that touch lives we never imagined reaching. She shared how the incident had connected her to her grandmother's legacy of community building, and how it had inspired a new generation to choose dialogue over division. The audience listened intently as she described the transformations she'd witnessed, from classroom discussions to corporate boardrooms, from prison rehabilitation programs to international peace initiatives. During the Q&A session, a corporate executive shared something unexpected. His company had been on the verge of implementing aggressive security measures after several racial incidents at their locations. Instead, inspired by the coffee shop model, they invested in community engagement programs. Our stores are now gathering places for dialogue, he reported. Incidents are down, but more importantly, understanding is up. The summit coincided with the launch of a global initiative called Dignity Champions, a network of businesses, schools, and community organizations committed to creating spaces for dialogue and understanding. The coffee shop where Michelle's story began was designated as the first official Dignity Hub. After the summit, Michelle returned to the coffee shop with her fellow speakers. The owner had prepared a special surprise, a wall displaying photographs and stories from similar initiatives around the world. Coffee shops from Seoul to Sao Paulo had adopted the community conversation model, each adding their own cultural elements while maintaining the core principle of turning conflict into connection. A group of international students sat in one corner, part of a new exchange program inspired by the movement. They were developing an app that would help people find safe spaces for difficult conversations in their communities. We want to make it easier for people to choose dialogue over conflict, one student explained, no matter where they are in the world. The coffee shop's impact had come full circle. The same space that had witnessed a moment of hatred had become a global symbol of transformation. Regular customers now sat alongside visitors from around the world, sharing stories and finding common ground over cups of coffee. Patricia's granddaughter, now working on a school project about positive change, interviewed some of the international visitors. What surprised me most, she wrote in her report, was how similar everyone's stories were. No matter where they came from, people had experienced both hatred and healing, and they all said change started with one person choosing to respond differently. As the day drew to a close, Michelle sat in her usual spot by the window, watching the diverse crowd inside and outside the shop. A news crew was setting up for a live broadcast about the summit, while a group of community leaders from different cities huddled around a table, sharing ideas and making plans. An elderly man who had been a regular customer since before the incident stopped by her table. "You know," he said, "I used to come here just for the coffee. Now I come for the hope. Every time I walk through that door, I see what's possible when we choose to be better than our worst moments." The coffee shop had become more than just a symbol, it was a living laboratory of human potential, proving that change doesn't require special powers or perfect circumstances. It requires only the courage to choose wisdom over reaction, understanding over judgment, and hope over hate. As Michelle prepared to leave, she noticed a mother explaining something to her young son while pointing at the wall of stories. "Remember," she overheard the mother say, "it's not about waiting for the world to change. It's about being brave enough to help change it, one moment at a time." 1 year after the incident, Michelle stood in the transformed coffee shop, now barely recognizable from that fateful morning. The small cafe had expanded, taking over the adjacent storefront to accommodate its new role as a community hub. The original space remained a working coffee shop, while the expansion housed a community center dedicated to promoting understanding and dialogue. Today was special, the first anniversary of what locals now called the moment. People had gathered from across the city and beyond to celebrate not just a viral video, but a year of continuous positive change. The walls were covered with photographs and stories, each one a testament to how a single choice could spark a movement. Patricia, now a regular speaker at community events, stood near a display featuring letters from around the world. "A year ago, I was that angry woman," she told a group of visitors. "Now I teach others how to recognize and overcome their prejudices. If I could change at 62, anyone can change at any age." The coffee shop's transformation had inspired a nationwide network of dignity cafes, businesses committed to creating spaces for community dialogue and understanding. The original shop had become a training center, hosting owners and managers from around the country who wanted to learn how to replicate its success. A touching moment came when the young girl who had witnessed the original incident, now a year older, presented her school project. She had interviewed dozens of regular customers, creating a documentary titled "When Coffee Builds Bridges." Her conclusion was simple but profound: sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. The city's mayor arrived to make a special announcement. Inspired by the coffee shop's impact, the city was launching a new initiative called Conscious Community Spaces, a program to help local businesses become hubs for dialogue and understanding. The coffee shop would serve as the model and training center for the program. Michelle's consulting work had evolved into a full-fledged movement. Companies weren't just seeking crisis management anymore, they wanted to create cultures of understanding. Her Beyond Tolerance program had been adopted by organizations across multiple industries, from retail chains to healthcare systems. The coffee shop owner shared some remarkable statistics. Customer interactions had increased by 300%, not just for coffee but for conversation. The average visit length had gone from 12 minutes to over an hour. Most importantly, reported incidents of discrimination in the neighborhood had dropped significantly. A group of sociology researchers presented their findings from a year-long study of the coffee shop effect. They had documented hundreds of stories of transformed relationships, challenging the conventional wisdom about how social change happens. Sometimes, their report concluded, the most powerful catalyst for change is not confrontation but conversation. The anniversary celebration included a unique element, a story exchange, where people could share their own moments of choosing understanding over anger. A teenager described how she had defended a classmate from bullying using Michelle's approach. A bus driver shared how he had turned a racist comment into a teaching moment. Each story added to the growing tapestry of change. Patricia's granddaughter, who had been quietly working on a project all year, unveiled a digital archive of transformation stories collected from around the world. The website, called Ripples of Change, would serve as a resource for future generations, showing how individual choices could create lasting impact. The original viral video had spawned countless others, creating a genre of dignity response videos, moments captured on camera where people chose grace over confrontation. But unlike many viral trends, this one had created lasting change, transforming how people thought about responding to prejudice. A group of international educators presented their findings on how the coffee shop model had been adapted in different cultural contexts. From Japanese tea houses to Middle Eastern cafes, the basic principle remained the same: creating safe spaces for difficult conversations. Michelle's book, The Choice, had become required reading in many schools and corporate training programs. But what made her proudest wasn't the sales figures, it was the dog-eared copies she saw in the coffee shop, passed from person to person, filled with notes and underlined passages. As evening approached, the celebration took an unexpected turn. Community members had organized a candlelight gathering outside the shop. Each person held a light, representing their commitment to being dignity champions in their daily lives. The sight of hundreds of lights illuminating the street created a powerful visual metaphor for how individual choices could light up the darkness. The coffee shop's legacy had extended far beyond its walls. It had become a case study in how businesses could serve as catalysts for social change, how small moments could spark global movements, and how choosing wisdom over reaction could transform communities. As the anniversary celebration drew to a close, Michelle found herself back at her usual spot by the window. A new customer asked her if she was the woman from the video. Instead of answering directly, she smiled and asked, "What brought you here today?" "I heard this was a place where hope lives," the customer replied. "Where people learn to see each other as human beings first." Looking around at the diverse crowd, students and seniors, business people and artists, locals and visitors from around the world, Michelle realized that the true legacy of that morning wasn't just about her response to hatred. It was about how that response had shown people a different way forward, proving that change doesn't require special powers or perfect circumstances. It requires only the courage to choose wisdom over reaction, understanding over judgment, and hope over hate. The coffee shop had become more than a symbol. It was a living testament to the power of choosing dignity in the face of prejudice. As night fell and the candles outside continued to flicker, Michelle understood that the real story wasn't about a viral video or a moment of grace. It was about how that moment had awakened something in people, a recognition that they too had the power to choose a better way forward, one conversation, one connection, one cup of coffee at a time.